Donald Trump's stolen documents case has been at a standstill since May, despite having immense evidence of wrongdoing. But if that wasn't bad enough, Judge Cannon decided to stay proceedings because of the recent decision from SCOTUS on Trump's immunity case. And this means that things are brought even further to a halt, more so than they already were. And in the request to enact a stay of proceedings, Donald Trump attacked Biden, which he should not have done in this legal setting. And this was such an egregious act that an ex-military prosecutor ripped into Donald Trump for it. And I'll play that in a second, but first, I want to touch on Judge Cannon's bias in this whole case. Because she has very clearly been helping Trump every step of the way despite mountains of evidence against him. And this just goes to show you that it's not just the Supreme Court that Donald Trump affected, it's also individual judges like this. Just take a look at this clip.
When Judge Cannon was assigned to the case, I just wrote off the possibility of Trump being convicted for the stolen documents altogether. She has behaved throughout this process as if she was a member of Trump's defense team. I think what's worrisome about the Supreme Court's immunity case and what's worrisome about Thomas's even more radical concurrence in that case is it suggests that maybe the justices aren't that different from Eileen Cannon. They're just better at picking their spots instead of haphazardly doing everything they can do to possibly benefit Donald Trump. They just sneak in where it really matters and give him immunity, or in Thomas's case, claim that the whole prosecution, the whole special prosecutor is unconstitutional. It is worrisome. I mean, we are going into, a very difficult election. If Trump wins, we could be going into a very difficult presidency. And the courts, from Eileen Cannon all the way up to the big house and the Supreme Court, seem to be signaling that they have no interest in reining in Donald Trump.
Glenn, Trump also alleging in his motion for stay, relief, et cetera, that the DOJ is violating its own unwritten 60-day rule, wherein the DOJ avoids the appearance of election interference in the run-up to an election. But how is that even applicable here? I mean, you talk about, inappropriate language. I talk about, bad faith legal arguments. Trump was indicted last August, 2023 in this case.
Yeah, the rule that I think has some wisdom behind it, that the Department of Justice will take no overt law enforcement action in the run-up to an election, like 60 days out from an election. For example, you wouldn't execute a search warrant as part of an investigation on somebody who was running for Senate in the week before the election. That is fraught with peril, even if it is appropriate from a law enforcement perspective. This is different, Katie, as you well know. And long ago, Merrick Garland said, listen, once charges have been brought, once a grand jury has indicted the defendant, in this case, Donald Trump, the case is now in the court's jurisdiction, and it is within the court's purview to continue moving it forward toward a trial. So what is the Department of Justice supposed to do? Dismiss it because Donald Trump would love to retake the reins of presidential power so he can, flex his absolute presidential immunity muscle? I mean, let's be clear. We have an imperial Supreme Court that just said presidents are also imperial. They are monarch-like, and they now have the power of lawlessness with impunity and immunity. If that isn't concerning, and if that doesn't get people up and out to the polls together with everything else, I don't know what will.
Ian, quickly, I wanted to ask you about a component of that SCOTUS decision. It talks about how you're not permitted, jurors or courts are not permitted to look into the motives, the intent of the president in the decisions and the conduct that he or she commits. But I have a problem reconciling that with the idea of specific intent. You have to have this specific intent to commit a crime. It can't be an accident when it happens. And so how is it then that I read an expansion of this absolute criminal immunity when it comes to core presidential powers, when Donald Trump can speak to his DOJ officials with corrupt and criminal intent to try to illegally overturn the results of an election, and yet now, moving forward, Judge Chutkan, the DOJ, and other prosecutions are now hobbled or hampered because you can't look into the motives of why the president did what he or she did?
Yeah, I mean, it's important to understand just how broad the Trump immunity decision was. It said, for example, that pretty much any conversation that the president has with their subordinates can't be the subject of a prosecution. So, like, if the president were to say, tell his attorney general to go arrest his political rivals, the opinion is pretty clear that nothing can be done about that. It also says that even though the president can be prosecuted for stuff he does that doesn't involve his official conduct in office, you can't bring in evidence of what he did as president in order to prosecute him. Some of those statements are very vague, but it's just not clear to me what can be done about Trump at all. A lot of these stolen documents were produced during the course of his presidency. Does that mean they're immune? I mean, I don't know. It's such a confusing and yet very sweeping decision.
So yes, this Supreme Court decision on presidential immunity has really far-reaching scope and really threatens democracy as we know it. And it doesn't help when we have judges like Judge Cannon over here helping Donald Trump every step of the way. And especially when they make it so obvious, like allowing Donald Trump's team to just attack Biden in a setting that doesn't involve him. Just take a look at this ex-military prosecutor rip into Donald Trump for this move.
Breaking news out of Florida, Judge Cannon saying, I'm going to agree with you, Donald Trump, and temporarily stay some important deadlines. Your thoughts?
You know, Katie, so much to dislike, both in form and in substance about this one. And I think what I want to start with is just two short lines from the motion that Donald Trump's lawyer filed yesterday. So we'll talk about just how quickly Judge Cannon acted when her action was going to be to the benefit of Donald Trump. Here's what they say in the opening paragraphs of yesterday's court filing. Quote, President Biden's exceedingly weak debate performance on June 27. Quote, President Biden's failing attempt to communicate with the voters, close quote. Katie, I was a federal prosecutor for 30 years. I've never seen language like that in a court filing from a defense attorney or a prosecutor, and any self-respecting judge would consider ordering it stricken from the motion and then issuing a show cause order, directing the attorney who authored it to show cause why they shouldn't be sanctioned for turning a court filing into a campaign ad. That's the first observation. The second is think back to May when Jack Smith, special counsel, filed a motion asking Judge Cannon to modify Donald Trump's conditions of release to stop him from saying and posting things that were endangering law enforcement. She has yet to act on that, and yet within 24 hours of Donald Trump's attorneys asking her to do something, she couldn't jump on it quickly enough and entered an order basically taking a train that was already stopped dead in its tracks and putting it in reverse. So she's moving away from a trial date rather than toward a trial date.
I was envisioning, Glenn, her putting like a boot on the wheels of that train.
So overall, I'm glad that we had a legal expert in here calling out Donald Trump for this, because this really was an egregious act. And it really just goes to show you his character as a person and as his legal team, because this is just not something that you should do. Biden would never do the same thing. But overall, this week has just been a terrible week for America and democracies all across the world. The Supreme Court opened a can of worms that is already having rippling effects all throughout our society. But this was their plan all along. They've been slowly helping Donald Trump, and it's been increasingly getting more and more intense, because the Supreme Court is there to serve Donald Trump and no one else. And if we want any chance at stopping them, we have to get out there and vote blue this November.